Oh well, small crowd, that's okay. Hi, I'm Frank Coy. I'm from Designs by Talent. And I'm redoing a panel I introduced for Ushicon about 6 years ago. And a lot's been happening since I did it. Some things, unfortunately, came true that I predicted, and some new stuff that happened, which basically this is talking about how I've noted how things evolve in our community. And when I first started it, it was basically about cosplayers, and then it had to be expanded out just for the whole nerd community because it just broadened the way it was. And yes, this is a bit of a dramatic title, but it sounded good at the time, and I didn't see any reason to change it. But basically, I'm just addressing 3 points. And one is, I said, reviewing how the zeitgeist has changed culturally for us. And so a good chunk of what I'm going to be talking about will be historical. And then we start getting about social interactions, where we're talking about how, there's no such thing as an objective point of view, like in Rashomon, and how that leads to problems, and how that can be related to conflicts. And then you get to the whole point where you have to start addressing root causes, or else we're gonna basically go down a shithole. So, I'm a little interactive, and I'm gonna go back to about 2002, which I don't know about, there was an important pop culture moment, turning point in 2002. I don't know of any, just for the sake of, usually I get a crowd and I make them participate, but we got a small crowd, and I don't know how long this is gonna go, so. But anyway, back then, the film franchises started really going beyond lucrative. And the very big turning point, as far as I can see, is Spider-Man. Spider-Man was a game changer, because unlike, say, Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, which came with a lot of cachet coming into it, Spider-Man was a gamble, and it broke mammoth records that took years before anybody could match or surpass. And like I said, it's almost a $5 billion franchise now. And then you got movies like Dark Knight Trilogy, which won an Oscar, and people were incensed that it wasn't actually nominated for Best Picture. And it's, as lore goes, it contributed to the rule changes for the Oscars. And then of course, Marvel Universe, that speaks for itself. And then of course, Harry Potter is just an endless empire that just goes on and on and on. And the other thing that starts changing after 2002 is marketing and PR. Have any of you ever been to Comic-Con, San Diego? Right now, that is a marketing nightmare. Meaning it's just, you go there, you're selling. Before, 20 years ago, it wasn't the craze that it was. Now, the studios know, if I want to sell my picture, I gotta go to Comic-Con. If I'm a genre picture, I've gotta go there, because that's where hardcore fans are gonna generate buzz. And it's worth investing the money. I'll even tell you, back in 2004, when the last time I went, when they were promoting Batman Begins, the panel was on a double bill with Constantine. Only half of it was devoted to Batman. The other half was devoted to Constantine. But you had Keanu Reeves, but and nobody had film footage, preview. The only people who had footage on a superhero movie was The Incredibles. Now they're not stupid. They are ready for you. Then after that, television. And this is where things really start to change in pop culture. We start getting modern reboots. Battlestar Galactica, Doctor Who, suddenly it's becoming more adult, or rather, not necessarily gritty. Yes, Battlestar Galactica is gritty, but more adult in thinking. It's no longer considered juvenile. Then reality shows start catching on that nerds and geeks, there are enough of you that are out there to exploit. So you got shows like Beauty and the Geek, which Ashton Kutcher created. You got Face Off. You got Geek Love. That's dating show. Geek Love is a dating show. And there was a market for that. King of the Nerds. That was basically Survivor for geeks. Then suddenly, like, hey, we're gonna people start taking the subject seriously. I don't know if anybody have seen that show Castle where they featured steampunk. And they actually I knew some of the people who costumed that episode. So they were taking it seriously and they were being respectful. So you see how that's shifting. Then now, they're bringing in money, ratings. Big Bang Theory is still one of the biggest successful comedies of the decade. There was one point a few years ago, Walking Dead was the highest rated drama on television. Think about that. A zombie show getting better ratings than Emmy Award winning dramas. Then they're the ones getting the awards. 2016 at the Emmys, Tatiana Maslany, Best Actress for Orphan Black, a little niche show on BBC America. Rami Malek for Mr. Robot, and of course Game of Thrones. That part's not too surprising, but they swept. And so you see how we're shifting and shifting, like people are taking it more seriously. And then now we have cultural relevance, because when you think about Handmaid's Tale, you think like Stranger Things is a callback to like a time of nostalgia and what life was like. So you really start suddenly, hey, things were shifting, things were changing. So, and as part of that change, you get changes in the digital landscape. And one of the things is, because we've got this nice thing called the internet, suddenly people can get in touch with each other. Suddenly you realize, hey, I'm not alone. Back when I was a kid, when I shared a fandom, we had to do it by newsletters and mail, stamps. We were lucky the newsletter came out once every 2 months. That's the thing, and here everybody's suddenly discovering these things, and it's creating new fandoms. And that in turn creates this rapid acceleration in the community, because you can connect to each other at a touch of a button. And then, boom, suddenly everybody wants to costume, or suddenly realize, hey, I could start selling costumes. Of course, a lot of those people who tried selling costumes were not good businessmen. Now, as great as it was, that ended up having a shift in how we have social media, because in the early days, back in 15 years ago, everything was much more monitored and careful, like a chat room. Everything was slow. That was the best way of putting it. YouTube was for giving you tutorials. Now YouTube is for making reality stars. Now you have PR firms from Twitter and Instagram. Everything is instantaneous, and that does have effects, and we'll talk about that more later. And with all that new fandom that's coming in, with new generations and parents teaching their children, you've got waves of conventions. And just to give you an idea how much has changed. Since 2002, DragonCon, 500% increase in attendance, over. That means 500% more people want to party for 5 raucous days. And that should be a life goal for all of you, to get to DragonCon at least once. It is serious hardcore party for the nerds. You've got, San Diego Comic-Con, they sell out and they have scalpers. There are people, and they actually have to start having free stuff in the streets in order to accommodate people. You've got, like I said, LA Anime Expo, over 100,000 people. One of the first cons came from Texas and Dallas, that was A-Con. When they started out, they had 300 people. This was like back in the early 90s, who would have ever thought anime cons would be attracting over 100,000 people? And then of course, Texas is conservatively well over 50 events. There's more events in Texas than there are fandoms that can accommodate them. That's just the brutal reality. Wizard World is all over the place. Read exhibitions. They're in the business of creating events. They're responsible for PAX, New York City Comic Con, which is a crazy place. And you've got places all over the country. I mean, Saudi Arabia? Would you ever have thought that there'd be Comic Cons in Saudi Arabia? Okay. So, it brings up the questions talking about this. We have an external and internal question, like, how has our society changed as far as the nerddom? And how has our community changed as far as nerddom? And so, this is where I bring up. I don't know if anybody would try to answer that. What do you think in the past, what the public, some average Joe public would say about a nerd or a costumer even? Something positive. Anyone take a guess?
Creative.
Yep. Anything else?
Smart.
Smart? I'll give you a couple others. I've heard yes, bohemian in a good way, and inspiring. I've heard people say, you're so brave. Literally, you inspire, literally the word inspiring, to put yourself out there and enjoy yourself. But then there's also the negative, and I'll jump right to that. These are some of the things I've heard in the past. And note that last one. That one too. And there have people, one of the most infamous stories 12 years ago, Dragon Con has this cosplayers parade. It attracts thousands of people from the city to watch. It's a big deal. It gets locally filmed. Someone from the local news, one day, she was caught off camera calling all the costumers a bunch of losers. Didn't sit too well. No. But this goes back to this whole thing, like, there was this point where there seems to be an enlightenment, growth. Part of it comes from changes in media attention. Because people are noticing it. You've got films, you've got subject matter. 15 years ago, there weren't a lot of photographers hitting the cons. Now there's a lot of professionals who use cosplay subjects for their shoots. Who is always offering. You can always find somebody offering to use cosplayers as a subject matter. It's no longer unique. It used to be kind of something more unique 15 years ago. You got filmmakers. There's been at least half a dozen films, documentaries, experimental films about nerds, especially cosplayers. Some of them are good, some of them Biggest important thing, demographics. Yesterday's nerds have children, and they're raising them. You see a lot of people with kids. They're raising them, telling them it's okay. And you also have a lot of people, because of all the acceptability, television shows, Marvel movies, whatnot, they don't have a problem now saying, going to a con and expressing their fandom. So you're getting this very broad, much broader demographic than you would have seen like 20, 30 years ago being at. Now, the problem is, in spite of that, life has still been kind of brutal. You all recognize Hugh Jackman there. I remember a big, big deal back in 2011. There was this article, Men's Fitness, in the same issue they were doing stuff like how to get a physique like Batman and be a great crime fighter. But their online editor wrote this article. He went to New York Comic Con, and he starts out saying how cons are a nice safe haven where you can enjoy your geekdom in peace. Then he went out of his way to photograph the most unattractive, the most misshapen, the ugliest people that he could find in costume and ridicule them. And one of the worst things was there was a girl in a silver bodysuit playing the character Dagger from Cloak and Dagger. He took a picture behind her without her permission even. And he posted, said, "Cloak and Dumpy?" It got around in our community. We went ballistic. And we went out and we gave the magazine hell. And they shut that article down. Because they said, yep.
I have a question. You have reaction from costumers. You may be enough. What was the reaction from the costumers?
I'm getting to that.
Okay, sorry.
This is the whole point. The costumers were furious. That's what I mean. Cosplayers were furious. Because there were a lot of costumers who were professional trainers and athletes. They were furious. How dare you do that to somebody? So what if they don't have big muscles or perfect bodies? How dare you humiliate them like that? And that guy was forced to apologize, and he gave this half-assed, basically said, I'm being pressured into apologizing because some people are too sensitive. And that was what was coming down to it. And it brings about this point where we have a point where social media can really be a powerful device to champion causes. Because that's one of the first times I remember people rallied and said, we're not gonna let you get away with that. That's BS. We're not gonna let you, because of course, he thinks, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? And I would have liked to ask him, what if you went to Gay Pride in New York and did that? What if you went to Lilith Fair? What if you just went into the park and picked random people who were trying to exercise and did that? You wouldn't do that because, oh, I don't know, it would be dehumanizing. But somewhere in his brain, he still thought it was okay to pick on nerds and costumers. And that's why I said, well, the more things can change, the more they stay the same. And this young kid, he's a brony. You know why he's on a ventilator? His friends found out he was a brony, and he got harassed to the point and ridiculed to the point where he tried to kill himself. He tried to hang himself. As far as I know, he's still alive. He made it alive. And this brings up like this whole point where now we're seeing, the problem with online behavior is that, of course, being online and social media exasperates a certain type of mindset, because it's like there's an anonymity. It's like how you get really pissy in your car and you're not interacting, you just want to ram somebody in because you're in a bad mood, where if you met them in person, you probably would control yourself. And this is going to go something else that I want to mention. People have always been talking in recent years about bullying. There's an epidemic of bullying. If somebody is systematically trying to ruin your life, or if they drive you to suicide, that's not bullying. Bullying is a juvenile word. It's happened when kids get their lunch monies taken or they're intimidated. If this is happening, this is harassment. That's a grown-up legal word. That's the word of lawsuits. That's a criminal activity. And it's very easy to just say, oh, there's a bullying problem, because that's a sexy word. Harassment has too many syllables, but it's the more precise one. So it brings up the issue, why, even though we are enlightening and so forth, do people think it's still okay to be like that, to be jerks sometimes? I mean, besides just general immaturity. One thing, which I gotta explain this first point. What this means is we're mammals. Mammals are sexually selective species, meaning we respond to visual cues on a primal level. If something is pretty, we respond to it. If something we think is ugly or offsetting, we respond like that on a very primal level. That's where part of it comes from. And that's a very primitive instinct thing that it takes a long time to fight that instinct. I'm not gonna, I can only judge people so much when they're young and stupid and they're not right. And it goes back to this idea, like saying, if you're different, oh no, you can't be cool if you're different. If you're pretty, you gotta be stupid. You can't be. I won't allow it. I can't allow a world of Cindy Crawfords who were A students. If you decide to wear a revealing outfit, oh, you gotta be asking for it. You must want it. How many guys have pulled that line over the generations? And of course, if you're weak, you're meat. And here's what brings things is about nerddom. It seems like in the last few years how people I've heard some cosplayers say, "Oh, it's great to be a nerd now. It's cool to be a nerd." That's a fallacy. Nerds haven't been accepted. What the definition of nerds has been changed. Liking superhero movies, liking Lord of the Rings, liking Harry Potter no longer is sufficient criteria for you to be a nerd. If true nerddom was accepted, that kid would not have tried to hang himself for being a brony. It's just they've changed the rules. And that's the problem. Yeah, you change those things. You still have a lot of attitudes. You still have a lot of attitudes about race and sex and so forth if you're different. And on that, and how our perceptions of those things, we do affect our attitudes. And I'm gonna give you pause a moment and give you a really good example. I had this example last time when I did this 6 years ago. I've tightened it up. How many are familiar? How many of you heard of Yaya Han? Okay. Yaya, I like to call her Cindy Crawford. There are people who love her, and there are people who hate her. And she's pretty much, I said, symbolic of what I call, you know, that geek girl syndrome. Oh, girls can't be geek, they're phony, they're only trying to get attention, they're trying to get seen. And of course, it doesn't help that Yaya has breast implants, which she fully admits. She fully admits that. But the reason why she's polarizing, you know what her sin is for being so hated? She learned how to make money out of being a cosplayer. She pays her mortgage from being a cosplayer. She's a guest all over the world. She has her own business. That's one of her stipulations. If she's a guest, I want my table here. I want booth space. And she's got an affordable product that sells. And when she's at the booth, there are guys who are lining up, they're willing to spend 20 bucks a shot for an autographed picture. And she has product which she will not let people rip her off on. And for her, this is not a hobby. It's business. Like I said, she's paying her mortgage by being a cosplayer. And her one thing that she's been smart enough is she knows how to jump. Is she the best cosplayer in the world? Probably not. Is she the prettiest? That's up to personal taste. But she was smart enough in the early days to know how to jump on an opportunity. And of course, she's that classic example of guys who hate on her, people that she's a phony, that she's only using. She's taking the purity. That's what you girls do. Now, anybody have ever heard of Angelique Trouvert? Anybody ever heard of Wendy Penny? Wendy Penny wrote ElfQuest for 40 years. Her big thing before it was a long time before, there's a great interview online out there that came out a year ago, beautiful, about her life. And one of the things that were really, that she had a hard time being taken seriously is because she liked to cosplay as Red Sonja. And they were saying, oh, you're just some bimbo who just likes to dress up in a skimpy costume. Why should I take you seriously? Yet, she was self-publishing for 40 years. Angelique Trouvert, that's her, she did Vampirella. She also did Red Sonja. She was somebody that artists like to use as inspiration. She also won the world costuming title for playing the Blackadder Queen Elizabeth. And she actually made a costume where she went as the robot dog, Boxy, from the original Battlestar Galactica. She was costuming in the 70s, and before 1980, she hand-sewed everything. Most costumers in the 70s and 80s were women. And even up into anime, how long before the guys really made inways? So to say that geeky girls who cosplaying girls are phonies and have no place. Now, going back to the whole subject here, where one of the things I have noticed is how, and I thought about the articulation of this, is that with all the change in the social media and the popularity, one of the unfortunate downside is cons in theory are supposed to be safe spaces. Most cons are no longer that. And because we've got so many people, remember I said you've got this broad demographic, you've got parents, you've got all sorts of people now who weren't there 30 years ago, and of course they're bringing their baggage. So we get stuff in the real world, we get problems more frequently, I want to phrase that, more frequently, based on gender, based on race, based on generation, meaning a younger nerd versus an older nerd. Those are the more entertaining ones, by the way. And then, of course, sexual divide. And when I mean sexual divide, I mean sexual proclivities. Because there are fetishists who go to cons. That's reality. They don't make them less than a nerd, but you know, many cons, there's nighttime activity that goes on, even at nerdy ones. So, what we get is this challenging of, when we get all these different people, suddenly we don't have everybody who's in the same comfort zone. You have, you know, we're not all on the same page. In fact, one of the things that motivated me writing this panel back years ago was we had a discussion, someone was perplexed about crossplay and trans cosplayers. She was actually confused and she wanted a dialogue about that because she couldn't understand crossplay. And it was kind of an interesting, albeit heated conversation, because this was on more of a superhero costuming panel as opposed to an anime where it's more common. But anyway, you also have the whole idea of no one wants to be labeled, no one wants to be that outsider, or people don't. That's an instinct, that's a survival instinct. And as I said before, nobody wants to be looked as a perv, especially if you're going around or in a suggestive costume or things, or wearing leather and weapons. And part of the idea, unfortunately, is where that conflict, of course, is that nobody has the same point of view. Remember I said we're not on the same page. And so when you really think about how diverse we are and how little things add, and I'm going to use myself as an example, male, middle-aged, Chinese, scientist, cisgendered, gay, and this is a nice little kicker, Catholic. That builds a lot of attitudes. Even if we're on the same side, we're going to have distinctions. So that leads down to, like, when we do have actual issues, which it's hard to kind of like break it down. It's hard to like say, it's hard to sometimes, especially on social media, to not be respectful. And basically I've actually kind of broken down what I think for the social issues can be, that conflict, you can break down into 3 general areas. First one is the most obvious. Purist, and when I mean purist, I mean that in a very broad term. I don't mean in one particular. There's a lot of ways to talk about where purist comes from, because in reality, there isn't anything wrong about being a purist in theory. Because especially, you know, you always find when somebody's adapting some book or comic, whatever, there's always that, ooh, I don't like this, I don't like that, because you revere the source material and you want the things that you loved to be retained. And what happens though, of course, it's hard to take a step back and say, okay, maybe that's not practical. And sometimes with customers, I love how you get conflicts about accuracy over canon. And I'm gonna, okay, I'm gonna kind of give you 3 examples. Oh, wait a minute, I gotta wait for that one. And I'm going to give you an example of the accuracy versus canon, because it could be something as simple as you're using the wrong color. You're using the wrong fabric. You shouldn't be using leather for that. This is somebody I knew. I took that picture. He, on a whim, he makes mascot suits for a living. And on a whim, he went to Joann's, he found a bunch of quilted fabric in the red pile sale, bucket yard, and after a couple of days, he made this. And he's actually wearing a muscle suit. And what happened was, there were two camps. There were people who said, oh my God, I've got to try that on. And there were those who went, so, now you imagine if they're gonna have a fit about something like this. You imagine what else, you can imagine where I'm leading this to. But I'm gonna go talk about sometimes how costuming, we do all have our buttons to press. I wanna be kind of fair to the people who are raising a fit. And again, I'm gonna do a mea culpa and talk about my own. I'm gonna give you 3 examples of costumings that bothered me to a certain increasing degree. First time at a street festival years ago, my husband and I, we saw this girl dressed as Wonder Woman. Worst Wonder Woman costume I've ever seen in my life. Why? It took us 10 seconds to realize she was Wonder Woman. Think about that. It should not take you 10, Wonder Woman, it took me 10 seconds, and I'm going like, is that, ooh. Okay, but we're like, look, she's having fun, it won't bother, I don't have to look at her. You know. Point 2, I was at a Wizard World convention. You guys, how many of you have seen the Pixar movie Brave? Merida. Wonderful character, strong feminist message about agency, don't want to be treated like a sex toy. My own person treat me with respect. This girl decided to dress as sexy Merida at this con. She's wearing a mini skirt and a plunging neckline and a cute little bow. And I really fought the urge to say, did you not see the movie? Did you not understand the message of the movie? But it's very easy to go down that path, to be judgmental. And this one, I'm gonna give you the most extreme. I'm not gonna tell you where it happened and when, because, I don't know who else was bothered. And this goes back when I said Catholic, remember I said Catholic? I was at an anime con. Someone came in their costume late in the day. They were zombie Jesus. I had to fight every urge not to punch this guy in the face. Now, it was well made, makeup was good, his friends thought it was terrific, but zombie Jesus. So, it's harder to not judge than you think it is. That's what I'm really saying right here. Now, going back to the purist attitude, we're gonna hit that touchy one. Okay, remember I said, yes, there's the whole issue about crossplay and trans geeks that get a lot of grief. Especially like in Austin, we have a lot of trans nerds. Sometimes it can be pretty tough for them. I've talked to a number of them. It's really hard sometimes for them to find a space where they can just enjoy and not be looked at, or they could feel the eyes. And then you got the whole colorblind costume. Ooh, isn't that, yes, that's perfect. Black History Month and the colorblind costuming thing. Oh, because I don't know how many of you, like a few years ago, a bunch of costumers decided, let's show one costumer every day of a person of color, black, because it's Black History Month. They had to be really thick-skinned that month, those people. Yeah. They really did, every time. So, and then you also have, like I said, the conundrum of cultural appropriation, which I really have to be patient with, because I have costumers who are like that. And the problem also, when I say a conundrum, is nobody has an actual sure-line definition of cultural appropriation. Mainly because it is a cultural thing. My husband, for instance, he makes kimonos in the past. We used to sell them here years ago. And there would be people who would be appalled at a white guy making money off making kimonos. And in Japan, they could not give a rat's ass.
It's fashion.
Yes. In fact, especially if it's an old kimono, we don't care. There was a girl last spring, she got a fancy high-end chanson that she got a lucky find on. And you have these so-called gatekeeping Chinese people who are all incensed that they said, you should have gotten permission. One girl who said, you shouldn't even done it even if you gotten permission. Or another person, you had to know the history of this and what it meant to like women's rights in China. And of course, this supposed American Chinese person, I'm gonna tell you right now, I wanted to go back and tell them, like, you do know that the feminist movement in China was influenced by suffragettes from Europe, and your reasoning for not an American girl can't wear a chanson is the same. You would have to apply the same reasoning that Chinese or Asian women could not wear Chanel. And Chanel was doing the same thing for women in the West before that chanson was invented. And you've got this whole thing, and it gets kind of silly. And it's hard. And by the way, the one person who said that she shouldn't be allowed at all to wear any Chinese clothes, you know what her moniker was on her Twitter handle? Katana. She was gatekeeping Chinese culture, and her name was Katana. Now, the thing about that is that when you get into these sort of things, some of this race, physical-based issues, some goes back to the whole purist attitude, like, I want it to be as is. When Smallville first came out, all those years ago, the fans were really up in arms because Kristen Crook wasn't a redhead, or she wasn't gonna dye her hair red or wear it. She doesn't look like her in the book. So you imagine how they were like, and of course they were saying the same thing about Candace Patton in The Flash. Because she doesn't look like in the comic. Eventually they all got over it, because at first, like going back to Candace Patton on The Flash TV show, they were first saying, Iris isn't black, and by the end of the year says, why are they writing Iris as such a sucky character? Most of them just got past it. It's about, for a lot of people, it isn't about the racism per se, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's when it crosses over into that. This lovely person, she's known as Breachipi. She's a delight. She's from like Minnesota. And she decided to be a version of Princess Peach with the frying pan. And then of course, because she was a black girl who was not a size 2 or under, she got a lot of grief. Then they were saying, call your whale, why don't you go cook up some fried chicken, etc., etc. So she called up her girlfriend and said, when you get home, I want you to bring home a pound of chicken. So she fried it up and had her girlfriend take a picture of her cooking the chicken, eating the chicken. Okay, you guys happy now? I did it! And not to mention, of course, like the whole Gamergate thing, and the people who were, the Comicsgate people over Black Panther. Yeah, I don't know how many of your stories about all the stories that came out about Black Panther last year when it premiered. There are fanatics, white fanatics, who were spreading these stories that they were being harassed by black attendees and being prevented from seeing the movie. They were actually trying to do everything in their power to keep the movie from being the #1 hit of the year. So, and remember I talked about King of the Nerds earlier. One thing I want to bring up about King of the Nerds, and just tell you how much, we may be nerds, but we're still human. It was very interesting that first year in the show, you had all these people who were scientists, technicians, engineers, and you had this one girl who was a short, dumpy girl who worked in a comic book store. And when they were breaking up teams, I'm thinking to myself, oh no. She's put in there so they know they're gonna pick her last because they're gonna think she's useless. And these people do not know how reality competition shows work. There's gonna be a twist. And whoever gets picked last, and sure enough, she had all this power in that episode to have the power to toss somebody out. They regretted it. And by the way, the people on Facebook were ragging her because of her looks. They were saying, oh, she's stupid, she's dumb. And then they're going like, oh, but Celeste, now she's a hot nerd girl. I love her. And it's like, you kind of fallen into that reality show trap right there, where they put up a mirror to the ugly side of human nature. Okay, I'm gonna pick things up a bit because I only got 10 minutes. Okay, there's the whole issue about why is there such fanaticism? Because, and it goes beyond being in one over's personal playground. And sometimes there is ownership. You get that ownership sense. And I remember a long time ago, there was a light bulb moment that made everything made perfect sense why people behave the way they do. If you replace the word fandom with religion, if your fandom is your religion, and you've got extremists, and you've got the casual follower, and suddenly things are being treated as sacred, even though it's fictional, even though it's not real. And of course, even in legitimate theologies, even in the same religion, people can't agree. Experts can't agree on what's dogma. And by the way, according to by federal regulations, the Jedi Code does qualify as a religion.
What's funny with that is even if he comes out and says, no, this is what it is, you still get other experts.
Yes, that's right. Now, and so we have the whole issue where we cross over to be zealotry, where you're not thinking, you're just saying, this is sacred, and I'm not gonna have anybody defile them. And that's when we're suddenly getting, social media is now a weapon, it's not a tool. And when I say weapon, I'm not kidding. Are you guys any familiar about the stories about the Outlander fandom? The hardcore book people I've heard are scary. If anybody writes something disparaging, even a little disparaging, they will go after you. They will do, if you're a professional writer, they will do everything to destroy your career. That's how fanatical they are. That's how sacred. They even gave some shit to the costume designer of this TV show because she took a little liberty because she wanted to create an effect, a thematic effect. Like, that's not accurate, that's not accurate, how can you do that? Okay, now, issue set 2. Issues tied to popularity. This one was not so obvious, but this one kind of, when I thought about it, kind of came up to me, and that is, we have a thing called the privilege of beauty. And that's a reality. Remember I said we're sexually selected species, we see something pretty, we respond. And I know customers will not go on Halloween because, not only because it's amateur night, but because they are tired of having to lose out to a girl in a store-bought costume that's just showing her boobs off. Yes, and so there really is a resentment of the pretty people. I found more of this on the older nerds, and it has to also do about that whole idea about the, you know, I remember I said because of the change in the pop culture, you have people giving themselves permission to be a nerd, to be a geek. And I know I've talked to people who are their attitude, even though they know how irrational this sounds, and even though those people didn't do anything to them, and it's like, the attitude of some of the older cosplayers especially are, okay, where the hell were you when I was being made fun of for liking Star Trek? Miss Prom Queen. Where were you, varsity athlete, when I was getting beaten up for liking comic book characters? You didn't go through any of that. That's like the mindset. It's the fear, they don't feel like that fandom has been earned. And they don't want to, they feel like, I don't want to relive high school. I go to cons to get away from high school. So that one actually surprised me a few back when that came up, but I could see it. I can see it. Especially when, like I said, there have been a lot more in the last 15 years, there have been a flood of photographers. And as ugly as they're saying, a photographer is going to go for the prettier, the sexier, the beefier, the more photogenic subject. They just are. It's a kind of, and because they're in the business to sell photos. And there's one other thing, there's a thing called issue between fandoms. And this is something I saw, I don't hear about it as much anymore, which is good. But I remember back in the day, ooh, the superhero and the anime cross, they were button heads. Who was better? Who was more legit? Who was this? Who are truer nerds? Who are better people? And it was, why I bring this up is it reminds me, for anybody who know history about the LGBT, back when the early days of the struggle, there was constantly this talk about who is the best person to represent in front of the cameras? Who has suffered more? Who is more suitable? And so you get a lot of marginalization, or you feel a lot of marginalization. So that's where, I mean, that one isn't so bad as it used to be. But I remember there was quite a bit of, 10 years ago, there was a lot of hostile energy between fandoms. And this brings up to more, as I get to the point here. This is a quote that Jeff Goldblum said in the movie. And that's a quote. His character wrote for People magazine, so. And this brings up something about what I call the deep why versus the surface why. Yes.
I can already see where this one goes.
Yes. And the problem is, of course, when I go back about social media, is that a lot of current responses are very short-term. They're very surface why. You know, you have the memes, you have the hashtag, you play to that short-term quickness. And memes are great. They can be very effective, they can be very useful, but basically what you're talking about is advertising, quick, simple advertising billboards that are online. And the problem is that these are not problems that can be solved that way. And nobody, let's face it, you can post up a great quote from Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi, those don't go viral. They don't. They might be the wisest things in the world, they don't go viral. And you have to always be careful about marketing. And the perfect example about the pros and cons of like a meme is the Black Lives Matter movement. And that's a great title for a group, BML. It's memeable, it sounds great, it rolls off the tongue, but it's missing a word. And because it was missing a word, the people who are going up against BML were able to commandeer and twist their message. And because they don't have to twist the people who are to believe, because that message is being sent out to the people who are sort of like in the middle, who aren't sure, who could be convinced. Because, I'm gonna tell you something, no one can be won over by the term all lives matter too. Because they said, it's implied, but because you took out that fourth word, your enemies were able to turn it on you and help to dilute some of your message to the people who you were trying to target. So, and there's like that whole point about, like I said, you want to proactively address, and that requires blah, 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 you know, respectful dialogue, satisfying inquiries, you know, all that whole rigmarole. And the point, of course, is why? Why am I making this message? Why make that effort to say, take the effort to like stop the meme and having a rational, because remember how I said like, there's this broad spectrum of people now? The truth of the matter is, you don't, even in Ushicon, you don't know if you're sitting next to an ex-murderer or a white supremacist, a white nationalist, sorry. These two people, cosplayers, nerds, were at the Charlottesville March. This guy is an avowed white nationalist. This is his girlfriend. She used to make money being a cosplayer, one of those models and guests and so forth. Imagine that shock. We got fellow nerds who are walking in a march with white supremacists and actually chanting, I don't care if it's in jest, but chanting, Jews won't replace us. Because you could be heard saying, yes, they're saying Harry Potter won't replace us, but they're all still saying Jews won't replace us. And of course, somebody got mowed over. You don't know. And so, you know, that's what I'm just kind of saying, why it's important that we have to kind of make that effort to bridge gaps in building and dialogue, real ones. Because, like I said, you don't know who is coming to these cons. And, you know, and let's not even talk about sexual predators. You know, we're talking about, you know, nobody knew, and the repercussions, I will say, when it came out and her name was published and all the media hit, no one was hiring her anymore. She got shunned. Because, I'm sorry, honey, even if you and your boyfriend don't want minorities to be hurt, even if you're only saying, I just don't want anything done to the expense of white people, you are walking with white supremacists, with people who are quite likely who have no qualms doing that. You made that choice. You thought it was okay. And hopefully you have friends that will knock some sense and make you understand that. So, and that's the end and the point of my talk.
When you were talking about both, you know, matching the whole issue of, do you match in color your character, do you match in gender your character?
Yeah.
One of the best, just total comedy, brilliant cosplays, in my opinion, I've ever seen, is a guy who comes to San Japan, and he looks like Isaiah Mustafa, the man your man can smell like from the Old Spice commercial.
Oh yeah.
It looks like it. So what he does is he puts on a pair of black elf ears. So he gets his ears be elf ears. He puts on a green cap. He wears a Zelda towel with the Triforce on it, and he walks around like that, holding a jar of Old Spice, you know, a container of Old Spice. And people go up to him and he's like, you know, look at your man. Now back to Link. Now back to your man. Now back to Link. And it's just brilliant to me. I laugh my ass off every time I see this guy.
Yes. And there is camps of people who are, there is the canon of costuming, and then there is the spirit of costuming.
Yeah.
And either is, one's not better than the other. It's just, you know, we used to do a costume panel a few years ago, and I had to say, I'm sorry, most of us are not built like an anime character, most of us are not built like a superhero, never gonna happen. But, so you gotta make do. In fact, when somebody mentioned like, Superman's suit is this color. Yeah, but what if you're not pale white?
Yeah.
What if you're a black guy? What if you're an Asian? What if you're a Mexican? That color, physics will not allow that color to look the same on him. And speaking of superheroes, tomorrow at 5 I got another panel about queer representation in the superhero genre. That's a fun one.
That's a hot topic.
Not really. You would be amazed what great laughs that is.